Lila Green, a cashier at Greenfield Grocers, was nearing the end of her long shift. Her feet ached from standing all day, and her mind wandered to the overdue electric bill sitting on her kitchen table. She adjusted her name tag, frayed at the edges, and pushed her curls back under her cap as she scanned a customer's last item. For Lila, this was the rhythm of her days. Balancing work with raising her 3-year-old son, Toby, left little room for anything else. She'd grown used to the relentless pace, the paycheck that barely stretched, and the quiet pride in knowing she was giving Toby all she could. It was a cloudy Tuesday evening when Lila noticed a young woman enter the store, her toddler perched on her hip. The child's curious eyes peeked over the edge of a stuffed animal, and the mother's movements had the telltale hesitancy of someone distracted by worry. The woman quickly gathered a few items: diapers, a small bottle of juice, and a single canister of baby formula. When she approached Lila's register, the mother offered a brief, apologetic smile. "Hi, just these," she said, shifting the baby from one side to the other. Lila smiled warmly. "No problem. You've got a cute little one there." The woman's face softened. "Thank you. She's my whole world." Lila knew the feeling. As she scanned the items, she couldn't help but think of Toby at home with her neighbor, likely drawing pictures on the back of the latest overdue bill. She glanced at the total, $36.42. The woman swiped her card. The machine emitted a sharp beep, followed by the words every shopper dreaded: transaction declined. The woman's eyes widened in disbelief. "That can't be right. Let me try again." She swiped once more. The same beep. Declined. Panic flickered across her face. "I'm so sorry. I don't understand. There's money in there." "I know there is." "It happens sometimes," Lila said, keeping her voice calm. She'd seen this before: cards that wouldn't work, errors that led to frantic digging through wallets, embarrassed explanations about waiting until payday. She glanced at the baby, now fussing in her mother's arms, then at the canister of formula. Lila's heart tightened. The woman began rifling through her bag, pulling out a handful of crumpled bills and loose change. "I think I might have enough if she trailed off, her voice breaking slightly. Lila hesitated. She barely had $20 to her name until her next paycheck, and her own fridge was sparse at best. But she thought of Toby and the nights when his cries had kept her awake, his tiny hands reaching for her as she rocked him to sleep. She thought of how much harder those nights would have been without the formula that kept him healthy. "I've got it," Lila said suddenly, pulling her own card from her pocket. The woman looked up, startled. "No, I can't let you do that." Lila shook her head and smiled. "It's okay. I know what it's like." Before the woman could protest further, Lila paid for the items and handed them back to her. "There you go. Take care of her." Tears welled in the woman's eyes. "I don't know how to thank you. This means so much." Lila waved it off, though the weight of her decision settled heavily in her chest. "Just pay it forward someday." The woman nodded, clutching the bag of groceries tightly. "I will. I promise." As she left, Lila stood at the register, wondering how she would explain the missing money to herself later. But for now she was content knowing that a baby wouldn't go hungry tonight. When her shift ended, Lila walked home in the cool evening air. Toby greeted her at the door with a picture he'd drawn: a lopsided house with stick figures holding hands. "That's me, and that's you, Mama," he declared proudly. She hugged him tight, the warmth of his little body reminding her why she made the choices she did. As Lila tucked Toby into bed that night, she couldn't shake the feeling that this small act of kindness had planted a seed. She didn't know it yet, but her life was about to change in ways she never imagined. The next morning, Lila awoke to the sound of Toby's giggles coming from the living room. He had turned a cereal box into a rocket ship, his small hands coloring it with markers that barely worked. Lila smiled, though her chest tightened as she remembered the previous night. The $36 she'd spent weighed on her. Her bank account already stretched thin. She got Toby dressed and walked him to the local daycare before heading to her second job at a small diner. The hustle and bustle of waitressing offered little time to dwell on her worries, though every so often, the memory of the mother's grateful face flashed in her mind. Lila hadn't shared what she'd done with anyone. She didn't see it as remarkable, just necessary. By the time her shift ended, she was exhausted. She collected Toby and made her way home, balancing a bag of groceries she could barely afford. The apartment was small but clean, its worn furniture holding stories of a simpler time. Toby played with his rocket ship, while Lila prepared a simple dinner of pasta and canned sauce. As they ate, Toby chattered about the stars he'd learned about in daycare. "Mama, can we go see them one day? The real stars." Lila smiled, brushing a curl from his forehead. "One day, baby, we'll go." Later that night, as Lila lay in bed, she wondered if that day would ever come. Dreams like that felt so far away when every decision came down to pennies. Still, she didn't regret what she'd done. If anything, it had reminded her that kindness often cost more than money. It cost faith, hope, and a belief that good deeds mattered. 3 days passed before the young mother returned to Greenfield Grocers. Lila was at her usual register, her mind focused on calculating whether she could afford to buy fresh fruit that week. She didn't notice the woman approaching until she was standing in front of her, holding the hand of her daughter. "Hi," the woman said softly, her smile tentative. Lila blinked in surprise. "Oh, hi. How's everything? Is she okay?" She glanced at the toddler, who waved a small hand and grinned. "She's doing great," the woman said. "Thanks to you. I've been meaning to come back and explain what happened." Lila's brow furrowed. "You don't have to explain." "No, I do," the woman interrupted gently. "I wasn't sure what was going on at the time, but my bank flagged my card for a security check. I didn't know until later that evening. There was no issue with my account, just a precaution. I was so embarrassed though, and I felt terrible for what you did for us." Lila waved it off, the familiar warmth of humility coloring her cheeks. "Really, it was no big deal. I'm just glad you and your little one are okay." The woman smiled, but her expression turned serious as she reached into her bag. "You have no idea how much your kindness meant to me. People don't do things like that anymore, not without expecting something in return." Lila shrugged. I know what it's like to struggle." "That's why what you did matters so much," the woman said firmly. "You didn't have to, but you did anyway. I want to thank you properly." Before Lila could respond, the woman placed an envelope on the counter. "This is for you." Lila stared at the envelope, her hands frozen in place. "What is it?" "Open it," the woman urged. Lila hesitated before sliding the envelope open. Inside was a crisp stack of bills, more money than she had seen in years. Her eyes widened as she counted it. This is $10,000. The woman nodded, her smile softening. "You changed my life that day, and I want to help change yours. I run a company, and I've been looking for someone trustworthy to fill a manager position. It pays well, and I think you'd be perfect for it." Lila was stunned. Words seemed to dissolve on her tongue. "I don't understand. Why would you do this for me?" "Because no one's been that kind to me in a long time," the woman said, her voice thick with emotion. "You reminded me what it feels like to be seen, to have someone care. And I can see that you're someone who deserves better than struggling just to get by." Tears filled Lila's eyes, but she blinked them back. "I don't even know what to say." "Just say yes," the woman said, smiling. "Say yes to believing in yourself." Lila looked at the cash, then at the woman who stood before her, a stranger turned savior. She thought of Toby and the promise she had made him about the stars. Maybe, just maybe, those stars were closer than she'd ever dared to dream. Lila sat on the edge of her bed that evening, staring at the envelope. The money was still neatly tucked inside, as if she were afraid to disturb it. Toby was asleep in the next room, his tiny snores filling the silence. She traced the edge of the envelope with her fingers, feeling the weight of what it represented. A chance. A lifeline. The woman's offer had been genuine. Lila could see that. But stepping into something so unfamiliar felt daunting. She had spent years surviving on routines, carving a life out of struggle and necessity. The idea of being a manager at some unknown company felt like a leap she wasn't sure she could make. Still, the next day, she dialed the number the woman had left on the back of a business card. Danielle Mercer. The card read, with the words founder and CEO printed neatly below. When Danielle answered, her voice was warm and encouraging. They arranged to meet at her company's office later that week, and Lila couldn't help but feel a mix of excitement and apprehension. On Thursday morning, Lila stood in front of her closet, assessing her limited wardrobe. She finally settled on a plain blouse and a skirt she hadn't worn in years. After dropping Toby off at daycare, she made her way to the address Danielle had given her. It was an unassuming building on the edge of town, but inside, the atmosphere was bustling and modern. Danielle greeted her at the entrance, her toddler balanced on her hip. "I hope you didn't mind me bringing her along," Danielle said with a laugh. "She's part of the team too, you know." Lila smiled, feeling a little more at ease. "Of course, she's adorable." Danielle led Lila through the office, explaining her vision for the company. It was a small but growing business focused on sustainable products for families' diapers, baby formula, and other essentials that were eco-friendly and affordable. Lila listened intently, her nerves slowly giving way to curiosity. "I've been looking for someone to manage our day-to-day operations," Danielle said as they settled into a bright, sunlit conference room. "Someone who understands the challenges families face and can bring that perspective to our work." Lila hesitated, her hands fidgeting in her lap. "I've never done anything like this before." Danielle smiled reassuringly. "Neither had I when I started this company. But I can tell you're resourceful, hardworking, and most importantly, you care. That's what matters." They spent the next hour going over the role, with Danielle answering Lila's questions patiently. By the end of the meeting, Lila felt something she hadn't in years: possibility. Danielle handed her a packet of information and encouraged her to think it over. As Lila walked home, the packet tucked under her arm, she felt a strange mix of disbelief and hope. Could this really be her life now? Could she dare to believe that things were finally changing for the better? The next morning, Lila returned to Greenfield Grocers for her shift. As she rang up items and greeted customers, her mind buzzed with thoughts of the opportunity before her. She hadn't made a decision yet, but she knew she couldn't ignore the pull in her heart telling her to take a chance. By midday, her coworker Rosa leaned over the counter. "You've been quiet today. What's on your mind?" Lila hesitated before sharing the story of what had happened with Danielle. Rosa listened, her eyes widening. "Lila, that's incredible. You have to go for it." "I'm scared," Lila admitted. "What if I fail? What if I'm not good enough?" "You're more than good enough," Rosa said firmly. "You're one of the strongest people I know. And this isn't just for you, it's for Toby too." Rosa's words stayed with Lila as she finished her shift. That evening, she sat down with Toby after dinner and showed him the packet. "Mama might be starting a new job soon," she said. Toby's face lit up. "Does that mean we'll get to see the stars?" Lila laughed, her heart swelling. "Maybe it does." She called Danielle the next day to accept the position, her voice steady despite the nervous flutter in her chest. Danielle was thrilled and set a start date for the following week. Lila couldn't believe how quickly things were falling into place. For the first time in years, she felt like she wasn't just surviving, she was building a future. Lila's first day at Danielle's company dawned crisp and cool, the early morning light spilling into her apartment as she hurried to get Toby ready. The little boy sensed her excitement and matched her energy, peppering her with questions as she combed his hair. "Will you have your own desk, Mama?" "I think so," Lila said with a smile. "Will there be snacks?" "Probably not for me, but maybe for the customers. Toby giggled and Lila's heart swelled with a mix of love and determination. She dropped him off at daycare, hugged him tightly, and whispered, "Wish me luck." "Good luck, Mama," he called after her, waving enthusiastically. By the time Lila arrived at the office, her nerves had returned in full force. She smoothed her blouse and took a deep breath before stepping inside. Danielle greeted her warmly, a cup of coffee in hand. "Ready for your first day?" Danielle asked. "Ready as I'll ever be," Lila replied, though her hands trembled slightly as she accepted the coffee. Danielle spent the morning introducing Lila to the team. The office was small but lively, with people bustling about and exchanging ideas. Lila quickly realized how passionate everyone was about their work. They weren't just selling products, they were making a difference for families like hers. Her training began immediately, and by the end of the day, Lila's head was swimming with information. There were spreadsheets to manage, suppliers to contact, and customer feedback to review. It was overwhelming but exhilarating. For the first time, she felt like she was part of something bigger than herself. That evening, Lila picked Toby up from daycare and told him about her day as they walked home. "It was a lot to learn, but I think I'm going to like it," she said. Toby looked up at her with wide eyes. "Are you the boss now, Mama?" "Not quite," Lila said with a laugh. "But I get to help make important decisions." Toby nodded solemnly, as if this was the most impressive thing he'd ever heard. As the weeks went on, Lila settled into her new role. She was a quick learner, and Danielle was a patient mentor, guiding her through the challenges of managing a growing company. Lila found that her years of budgeting, problem-solving, and multitasking as a single mother had prepared her in ways she hadn't expected. One afternoon, Danielle invited Lila to join her for lunch in the break room. "I wanted to check in," Danielle said, handing Lila a sandwich. "How's everything going?" Lila took a bite and nodded. "It's a lot, but I feel like I'm getting the hang of it." Danielle smiled. "You're doing great. The team loves you, and I can already see the difference you're making." Lila hesitated before speaking. "I've been meaning to thank you again for everything. You didn't have to do this for me." Danielle shook her head. "Yes, I did. You gave me a gift that day in the store, even if you didn't realize it. You reminded me that people are capable of incredible kindness. I just wanted to pay that forward." Lila felt a lump rise in her throat. She looked down at her sandwich, trying to compose herself. "I just hope I can live up to your trust." "You already have," Danielle said firmly. A few months into the job, Lila's life began to shift in ways she hadn't thought possible. With a steady income, she was able to pay off her overdue bills and even start saving for the future. Toby noticed the changes too. His mom smiled more, laughed more, and seemed lighter somehow. One evening, after tucking Toby into bed, Lila sat down with a notepad and started making a list. At the top, she wrote dreams for the future. Underneath, she added items she had barely allowed herself to imagine before: a bigger apartment, a car, a college fund for Toby. And at the bottom, she wrote in large, hopeful letters, "See the stars." The list felt like a promise to herself and to Toby. As Lila drifted off to sleep that night, she thought about how far she had come. The act of kindness she'd shown to Danielle had set everything in motion, but it was her own courage and determination that had carried her through. Her life wasn't perfect, and challenges still lay ahead. But for the first time, Lila believed in the possibility of something more. Months turned into a year, and Lila's life continued to transform in ways she had never imagined. The steady rhythm of her new job gave her and Toby a foundation they could finally build upon. Their once cramped apartment was replaced with a modest but cozy home on a quiet street, complete with a tiny backyard. Toby had claimed the space as his personal playground, racing around with a toy rocket ship in one hand and a plastic astronaut helmet perched precariously on his head. The changes weren't just material. Lila had grown in confidence and self-worth, her quiet determination evolving into a steady belief in her abilities. She wasn't just a manager at Danielle's company, she had become a leader. Her efforts had streamlined operations, strengthened supplier relationships, and launched new initiatives to make their products even more affordable for families. Lila's ability to empathize with customers resonated deeply with the team, and Danielle often marveled at how much she had brought to the company. Still, Lila hadn't forgotten the road she had walked to get here. Every time she paid a bill on time, bought fresh groceries, or tucked a few dollars into a savings jar, she thought about the days when those things had felt like impossible dreams. And every time she saw Toby's joyful face, she reminded herself that all the sacrifices had been worth it. One day, as they sat on their new living room floor assembling a model rocket, Toby looked up at her with wide, serious eyes. "Mama, do you think we'll ever go to space?" Lila smiled, placing a sticker on the side of the rocket. "I don't know about space, but I think we can go just about anywhere else if we work hard and dream big." Toby considered this, nodding solemnly. "Then I'm going to be an astronaut someday. And I'll be cheering for you every step of the way," Lila said, pulling him into a hug. The journey wasn't without its challenges. The demands of her role sometimes left Lila feeling stretched thin, and balancing work with parenting remained a daily juggling act. But she had learned to lean on the support of others: Danielle, her coworkers, and even the kind neighbor who still babysat Toby when Lila had late meetings. One evening, as she tucked Toby into bed, he held up a picture he'd drawn. It showed a lopsided house with a green yard, a big rocket ship, and two figures holding hands beneath a bright yellow sun. "This is us," Toby explained, pointing to the figures. "And that's our house. And that's where I'm going to go when I'm an astronaut." Lila laughed softly, smoothing his hair. "It's beautiful, sweetheart." "You know what, Mama," he said, looking up at her with a sleepy smile. "I think we're really lucky." Lila's heart swelled at his words. "I think so too, baby." After tucking him in, she sat at the kitchen table and pulled out her notepad. The list of dreams she had started months ago had grown, with items crossed off and new ones added. Next to save for Toby's future, she wrote "Enroll Toby in a space camp." And at the very bottom she wrote in neat letters, "Continue to pay it forward." She thought about that day in the grocery store, how a small act of kindness had set this all in motion. It hadn't been about expecting anything in return, it had been about doing the right thing in the moment. Yet here she was, living a life richer than she ever could have imagined. Not because of luck, but because kindness had a way of rippling outward, touching lives and sparking change. A year after starting her new role, Lila received a letter from a single mother who had purchased one of their products. The woman thanked the company for making essential items affordable, sharing how it had eased her own struggles. Lila read the letter twice, tears filling her eyes. She thought of Danielle, of herself, of all the families they were helping, and she knew she was exactly where she was meant to be. That weekend, Lila and Toby lay on a blanket in their backyard, staring up at the clear night sky. Toby pointed to a bright star, his voice filled with wonder. "Mama, do you think there are astronauts up there right now?" "Maybe," Lila said, wrapping an arm around him. "And maybe one day you'll be one of them." Toby grinned, snuggling closer to her. "You'll come too, right?" Lila laughed. "I think I'll leave the space exploring to you, but I'll always be here cheering for you, no matter where you go." As the stars shimmered above them, Lila felt a quiet peace settle over her. Her life wasn't perfect, and there would always be challenges ahead, but she had discovered something far more enduring than fleeting success. She had built a life filled with purpose, love, and the unshakable belief that every act of kindness, no matter how small, had the power to change the world. And for Lila and Toby, that was more than enough.